Hello, everybody, and welcome to San Francisco Zine Fest Cyberfest. This is the panel with parents who are also artists. And we'll start off with just a little bit of business in terms of San Francisco Zine Fest. We'll do the introductions, we'll go over some house rules. I'll introduce myself and then our panel. And then I have a few questions for the panel. For the most part, I will mostly want to hear the panelists speak. So I will give them the floor as much as possible. Let's start out with San Francisco Zine Fest. Founded in 2001 as a gathering place for writers and artists from around the world, but especially the Bay Area, typically held as a one-day event at the County Fair building in Golden Gate Park, our 2019 festival had about 240 exhibitors and over 5,000 attendees. Due to COVID-19, our 2020 festival is going 100% virtual. What is Cyberfest? Cyberfest is a new programming that San Francisco Zine Fest started, where normally we have one guest of honor because it's a one-day event, but since due to COVID, we have a little bit more time, so it's a 3-week fest, and we have 3 different guests of honor. The first week was Alex L. Combs, the second week was Death P. Sun, and this week is Donna Tucker. And I will go over a little bit of our safer spaces policy. We are committed to providing a harassment-free experience for everyone, regardless of gender, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, or religion. We will not tolerate harassment at San Francisco Zine Fest events in any form. Individuals violating the safer spaces policy may be sanctioned or expelled from the space or the event at the discretion of any San Francisco Zine Fest organizer. And let's respect people's opinions, beliefs, different states of being, and differing points of view. Always get explicit verbal consent before taking someone's photo or crossing other personal boundaries. Be responsible for your actions and aware that they may have an effect on others regardless of your original intent. A safe and respectful community is everyone's responsibility. And we'll just kind of go over what we're going to do tonight. Like I said, typically want to keep our video off to prevent lagging. We don't really need to worry about that so much tonight because there's only a few of us. The host, the guest of honor, ASL interpreters will have their video on, obviously. Keep yourself mute unless you're presenting. If you have a question, ask it in the chat. There are chat moderators. The ASL interpretation is provided by ProBonoASL. You can pin the interpreter to the top of your screen if you are in Zoom. Everyone else, above all, please be respectful. My name is Avy Jetter. I draw and I self-publish and I write a comic book series, Nothing Good Ever Happens at 4 a.m. It is a zombie story based in Oakland. I'm just a huge horror movie fan, even B movies. I love anything sci-fi or weird. Mostly I do a lot of portraiture that sort of can be combined with graffiti, street art, to tell a story, a personal story. I just started doing zines, which are personal zines that talk a little bit about my health, mental health and wellness, how to navigate your emotions and triggering and racial bias, things like that. I organized San Francisco Zine Fest with 4 other organizers, and I also am organizer for Oakland Create. So a little bit of my work. You can find more of my work at nothinggood4.com. And so let's get to the panel. I'm super excited to be here tonight with everyone. Tyler Cohen, Amir Abdul-Shakur, Aya De Leon. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Shawn Taylor. These are our panelists. They are all parents and artists, or you can say they are artists who happen to be parents. We'll get into a little bit more about that in our discussion. And so first up is Tyler Cohen. Let's just talk a little bit about Tyler and what she does. She goes by she, they are her pronouns. She's a cartoonist who likes to mix autobiography and surrealism. Her book Premahood Magenta won the 2017 Bisexual Book Award for graphic memoir. I'm going to kind of go over the bios really fast. I want to spend the bulk of the time asking you guys questions. All this can be found on her website. Next up, Amir. Amir Abdul-Shakur was also known as Amir the Photographer. He shot San Francisco Zine Fest candid shots and professional shots during our fest over the past few years. He's an Oakland-based photographer focusing on Black joy, street photography, and portraiture. Amir began his photography journey in February 2018 at a local parade in Oakland. Since the parade, Amir has focused on capturing the essence of Black life and the beauty and the humanity both domestically and internationally. And correct me if I'm wrong, is it Aya or Aya?
You got it. It's Aya.
Aya, okay. I thought so. Aya De Leon teaches creative writing at UC Berkeley. Kensington Books publisher, her award-winning feminist heist series, which includes Side Chick Nation. The first novel published about Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. In May 2020, Aya published her first children's chapter book, Equality Girls and the Purple Reflecto Ray, which I need to get a copy. That sounds amazing. It's about an Afro-Latina girl who uses her superpowers to confront the president's sexism. In December 2020, Kensington will publish her first standalone novel, A Spy in the Struggle, about an FBI infiltration of an African-American eco-racial justice organization. And next is Shawn Taylor. Shawn Taylor is a writer, educator, creative consultant, and coach. You can find his writings in the New York Times, Rad Dad, Ebony, the Nerds of Color website, and a host of academic journals. He just concluded a senior fellowship with the Pop Culture Collaborative, exploring the political and social power of fandoms. And so let's kind of get into this. My first general question for everyone, so you might want to all unmute, just answer in, I'll call on you from the order I can see you in my box. Just tell me your pronouns. I also want to know the number, how many kids you have, that sort of age range or age of your kids. Let's start with Aya.
I have one daughter who is 10 going on 11, and my pronouns are she and her.
And then Shawn.
Pronouns are he, him, his, and I have a 12-year-old daughter going on 37.
And let's see. I'm sorry, I can't see beyond. I have to share up. I'm just going to say Tyler.
I have one child. I go by she, they. I have one child, and they just turned 15.
Awesome. Amir.
He and his, and I have one son who is 9. Say hi, son.
Hi.
Nice, nice. And so, like I was saying in the intro, this is for everyone. Do you consider yourself an artist who became a parent, or a parent that had an art practice? And when did you fully embrace being an artist? Was it after having a child, or like I said, were you an artist first and then you became a parent? Sort of, and I'm not sure if who wants to answer that first. We can kind of go in the order again, the same order as before. Aya.
Sure. I am a late-breaking parent, and that was very intentional. I just watched a lot of women become moms, who are sort of in my artistic crew in our young adulthood, and just parenting seemed to be really hard on moms, particularly Black moms, that it was hard to continue to practice. So I waited a really long time and tried to develop my artistic career till I felt like it was going to be robust enough to survive that transition to motherhood.
Awesome. Shawn?
That's an interesting question. I think I've always been, and I mean, I've always been a writer or a performer. That's just what it is. But I also think that for, I don't know how many years I felt more like a dilettante. But now that I am a father, I seem to have a much more focused and energetic art practice now, because I think a lot of art is about world building. And I'm really trying to figure out how to build a better world for my daughter and other kids like her. And so my art has become more than just something that I do or perform. It's become almost like a practice, like people would have meditation or working out. It's become something, it's become more of a tool now than just a mode of expression.
Okay. Tyler?
I like that. I was an artist before, but having a kid threw me out of it for a while. And until my kid was a few years old, and then I was able to reintegrate the art back into my life. But parenting definitely had a profound effect on my content, but also my practice in terms of how just the shape of my practice. I couldn't just follow the muse and, create all hours, or, dinner had to be ready every day, that kind of thing. So.
Amir?
For me, I've always been an artist. I did music prior to photography. So before my son was born, I always dabbled into music and recording. And then once my son was born, I really started to kind of focus in on just capturing images of just being a new father. And, it later developed into what I now call my photography career.
Do any of you think or feel that, like Shawn was saying, it's become a part of his daily practice, like meditation? And so I feel like you don't necessarily have to be quote unquote paid or professional or have it fully be your 9 to 5 to consider yourself an artist. Do any of you guys feel that same way, or how do you feel about that? Is it something that you, because I, have a 9 to 5 and I still consider myself an artist. Do you guys have an opinion on that? Because some people would say if you're not getting paid or you're not supporting yourself with the practice, then you aren't truly an artist. How do you guys feel about that? And anyone can.
Well, I think that that's one of those things that's a lie of capitalism. I think that an artist is anyone who makes art. It's a thing that you do, and whether or not capitalism rewards you for it or somebody pays for it is really a separate thing. I mean, I think that there are two different pieces. One piece is the place where you decide to do it, for the joy or the power or the release or the whatever of it. And then the other thing is, I think, a battle to be able to put it in the center of your life, particularly for those of us who, most of whatever the 99% that have to make a living is figuring out, is there a way that we can make a living and do our art, which is really just about having more time to spend doing the art if it's the thing that makes money. So I think that those two things are separate. I think, and I think that for me, I'm a right first thing in the morning artist, so I wake up before anybody else in my family and I hit the computer to write, because that's the only time I'm really guaranteed to get. And I'll get a little more in, especially back in the day when, we went to gymnastics class and whatever. I'd be the, mom on the laptop who'd be like, hi, and, getting my book written. But I think, parenting is like art. It's one of the things that makes life worth living, that's really, really powerful. And it's not just being a parent, it's human connection, right? So making or adopting or having a new human being in your life and nurturing them is just a wonderful part of life, just like creating as an artist is a wonderful part of life. And of course, capitalism doesn't reward the things that we feel naturally passionate about doing. They reward us, a little bit for working at Walmart or working in corporate America, the things that they have to pay us to do because people wouldn't do it otherwise. And so I think, it's just the big challenge, I think, as an artist parent is that the arts and parenting are both unpaid or underpaid. And so it's like trying to figure out how to carve out time as a working person is really challenging.
Awesome. Is anybody else want to share on that? Or
I just got to say 100%.
yeah,
I, that conflict between, I feel like art has always been a part of human beings. Like it's part of what makes us Homo sapiens is that ability to think symbolically, and also that necessity as a way to gaze back at ourselves and at the universe, as a way to understand our place in the world, and also to come at it from a different angle that allows us to evolve in our thinking, and also to connect to each other. But that doesn't mesh well with capitalism.
right. And speaking, I'm sorry, did someone else want to say something?
I mean, if you're an artist, you're an artist. I mean, you're just maybe an artist that don't make money, but you're still an artist.
Right.
And so I think, art, making art is subjective. And as long as you're making that content and you're feeling good about it, I mean, you're an artist. Luckily, for some of us, we can make money from it, and that's a blessing, but I don't separate the two. The things I see as a photographer, I capture even when I don't have my camera. My photographic memory as I'm driving, even I see shots. Right. So you can never really separate the two. But you try to make time for each. And for me, my day job, it's not really, this is a position where I can still, explore my creative, lens, and I love it. So I don't really even, separate the two like that.
Do you all have a dedicated time where you do your practice, or do you sort of have to balance it with your day-to-day practical duties? I find early in the morning is best for me, sort of like Aya, but is there a time, can you be uninterrupted? Is there a time or that is on a schedule or a routine, or do you find like that changes for you on a daily basis? And how does that impact your work as a creative person?
I used to have my baby lay across my lap and put the laptop stand on her back and type. the pillow. I mean, because it wasn't going to stop me. I mean, I think right. One of the things about the mythology of art is that as this precious divine thing, which I think is the most horrible mythology about it by ever. It's practice. You get up and you do it and you shut your mouth about it. I think so many people try to turn it into like this, oh, I have to wait for the muse. But no, you don't. You got to sit down and type or draw or take a picture or paint, because I think that when you start mythologizing the art, that's when you start procrastinating about your art, because your head's so in the clouds. There's nothing practical about your practice. I'm an early board, 5 o'clock in the morning, boom, done. And my goal is to do 1,500 words a day, no matter what. Like, that's my goal. I'll not even eat a meal, because I think that if you don't keep a promise to yourself, you can't keep a promise to anybody else. So if I promise myself 1,500 words a day, that's what I'm going to do. And it has to happen.
And has your parenting or becoming a parent informed your actual, the theme or the subject matter, or, has it informed your work in a specific way that you can stand on?
Absolutely. I'm no longer snarky. Because I don't think snark or sarcasm has a place in a fully functioning world unless you're using it for humor. But I think so many people of my generation, proud Generation X person, hip hop generation, we've become world weary to the point where most of our words are useless. Like, I'm the co-founder of the nerdsofcolor.org, and I will no longer write a bad review unless the material is harmful, like Antebellum or something else. Like, I will not write a bad review anymore. I will only write reviews about things that I dig, because why would I put more negativity in the world? And it's not like you want to ignore things that are harmful, because I will definitely confront those and we can have that conversation, but I'm only going to support people in things that give me joy, that I think will be an enhancement or a value add to someone else.
Wow, that's huge.
Word. I'll say one of the biggest changes for me has been about, prior to having a kid, I only wrote books for adults, and that was really what I was interested in. But in the process of having a kid, the first thing you do is read 1,000 different picture books, right? And a lot of them are whack, and a lot of them don't have Black people in them. And, you're just like, wait a minute, there's a need here, right? So then I started writing children's books. I started with one about puffy hair, and then, you know, the picture behind me is from Equality Girls and the Purple Reflecto Ray, because I felt like there were all these really funny books for kind of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old super diaper baby, Captain Underpants. They were like funny and aimed at that crowd, but they were boys. They were all boys. Some of them were white boys, but they were boys. So I was like, I want something kind of funny for girls, talking about being girls. And, you know, now I'm working on some YA stuff. I've gotten lured into sci-fi fantasy. So I've got, you know, like a middle grade time travel novel I'm working on, and some YA spy novels with some fandom in it. But it's just really about, you know, Toni Morrison said, if there's a book you need to see in the world and it's not there, you've got to write it, you know? And so I feel like that became part of my parenting too. There are books that I needed my kid to read and I wasn't finding them. So I started writing them.
I think that follows that there's things that parents need to read that are to be talking about that weren't getting talked about. And that's part of what motivated me to start putting that into a bunch of my comics, because there was just a lot of conversations not happening, and also a lot of self-reflection not happening. So.
Do you think that gender plays a role in how you approach your art in terms of your child? Do you think that you've learned something or discovered something about gender that impacts your art and how you view parenting and combining the two?
Yeah, but well, you know, partly it's really looking at how I noticed in nursery school how much other parents who thought they were so evolved or liberal or whatever were still acting from a presumption around their, you know, a lot of the way they were interacting with their kids and the other kids around them was really coming from a very gendered place. And it was just, even though they didn't see it in their own actions. And that's where that's where I felt I had to call it out. You know, people who thought they were feminist and such, and they were really, and, you know, it's more a matter, and it's easy to call things out when you're observing it in other people, but it's another thing then to reflect into yourself and think about how you yourself are engaged with that. But my work has always been about kind of observations and raising questions and trying to get people thinking, as opposed to necessarily giving answers, because I don't have all the answers. I just want people to think, you know, to be engaging in questions. But I think it's also changing as my child has gone through puberty, and now they're a young teenager, and their relationship with gender has changed. And so, you know, and I also, my relationship with being able to talk about them in the world is changing, because now it's for them to kind of do that. And I need to be talking less about parenting in my work, except in kind of in ways that allow them more privacy now, because they're their life is that, you know, they're off on their own trip now.
Yeah, I would add, I think, you know, just ditto to everything that you said. And one of the things that's been profound for me is that parenting in some ways is one of the most gendered institutions I've ever been part of in my life. Yes. Even more gendered in a lot of ways than my heterosexual marriage, you know, because we, you know, could get married in a field, and I could, at the time, you know, same-sex marriage was illegal, and part of my vows could be that I would fight for marriage equality, and we could just kind of do it ourselves with our homies. But suddenly, when, you know, I was pregnant, then I needed institutions to help me. I didn't know, you know, like, I wasn't a midwife, I have midwives in my family. Suddenly I was depending on other institutions, and there I was in my Berkeley yoga class, and this woman was like giving us advice, and she was saying, so tell your husband to blah, blah, blah. And I was like, you know, like, whatever. Not everybody has a husband. Not everybody's straight. Not everybody has a partner. Like, what are you talking about? But suddenly I was dependent on all these different institutions, from birth to preschool to public or private or charter or whatever schools that had these incredibly gendered ways that they organize themselves, both around parents and pregnant people and children. And, and that's part of what I felt like I've really had to step up my resistance to. The racism is there, and the racism is strong as well, and the classism, but the sexism is like the first thing, a boy or a girl, pink or blue. And so I feel like that's also part of what I'm writing into, kind of this renegade Black girl space, to try and carve out some room for my daughter to be able to decide for herself who she wants to be.
Absolutely.
As fathers, as fathers, Amir and Shawn, do you find there are what's the right word I'm looking for? Do you feel a difference, or do you feel that there are expectations or even limitations placed on you as a father when you do? I know you show up at the school. I know you are heavily involved in your children's lives. So has that been an eye-opener for you? Some of the expectations or assumptions or stereotypes that have happened to you? Has that been a thing for you guys?
Not for me personally. I'm very much active, and you just, it's a balance. Everything's a balance. Finding time to do your love and your joy. But just, you find time for it. And so, like, for my son, he knows what I do. He came out yesterday on the shoot with me. He came out with his, just had the cell phone. It was, YouTubing, but just, I'm trying to bring, my family as much of the process as I can. So if I, bring him or my wife or whatever, we do it as a collective unit, and that makes it a lot easier. And it's a blessing that, other, creators don't necessarily have, to be able to kind of bring their family while they do, their creative joy.
Yeah, raising a Black girl is probably one of the hardest things you could possibly do, even in a so-called liberal bubble of California and the Bay Area, which is probably worse than certain places, I'd argue. But it's so difficult. Part of the reason is I'm never my daughter's father. I'm like, oh, you're such a nice uncle that you're taking her out. That stuff happens all the time. Or they're like, oh my God, you guys are so close. I'm like, what? We're not supposed to be? It's my kid. Like, what are you talking about? But the assumption is a lot of people, a lot of it's from Black people. Like, I have a friend of mine who's like, man, why you gotta babysit your kid tonight? I'm like, bruh, I've never babysat my kid in my life. I'm parenting. Like, this is what's happening right now. And so those types of things, and people, and it's so interesting how men frame parenting as a deficit. And so many women that I know frame it as a burden. Like, very few times for men, women, NBs, no one really talks about how fun it is to be a parent a lot of the times. The gender stuff is crazy because the early sexualization of girls happens at like 2. Just go look at Halloween costumes. The boys are all action, the girls are all servitude or half-naked little Ghostbuster babies. Like, it's crazy, right? So it's like that type of stuff. Like, so I'm more hyper aware of gender, but more hyper aware of how gender impacts my kid, who's a sweatshirt, sneakers person. Like, that's just how she rocks. She just wants to be covered and she likes it. But then I have a really funny story. So we were walking to the bookstore. When we walked to the bookstore, this boy goes, "Ooh, she's cute." And then when we walked out of the bookstore, a girl goes, "Oh, he's cute." And then my daughter's like, "Does that mean I'm fluid?" And it was just like, and that's just part of her. That's just part of her language. This is part of how she rocks now. So she sees the world in all of its everything, as opposed to living in, my binary thinking, man, woman, whatever. It still flares up. It's still difficult. It's like conditioning is a real thing. Language actually compresses a lot of what we're trying to explore with our children. So, but for me, it's just really about, I let her lead. I'm like, you want to wear a suit? Go ahead. You want to wear a dress? Go ahead. I'm following your lead. As long as you're safe and you feel safe, Daddy's going to back you up no matter what.
And so the biggest impact right now, is it COVID? Is it the fires? Is it police brutality? And how do you talk to your kid about that? I mean, these are huge discussions, and we're experiencing all three of them right now. Anyone can take this one.
I think the
I'll
biggest
just say
threat.
for my.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Amir. No, you got it, Amir.
All right. I think the biggest threat is white supremacy. That's for me because it's so much in your face. You see it every day. As a black male, for me speaking for myself, it's constantly triggered. Whether it's watching the news, whether it's just walking out and about, you're constantly in this constant state of being triggered. So we constantly have that conversation. You try to shield your children away from it a little bit because you want them to freaking be a kid and to live life and to be happy. But it's something that you got to constantly have that conversation. 2 weeks ago, I took my family to Washington, D.C. for the Commitment March because I felt like in this climate of racial injustice and inequality, that was just important to be there. And I wouldn't take that trip for the world. And so you just kind of have to just be a part of it and to have conversations and to try to make sense of it. But some things you just can't. I can't make sense of everything, as much as I try to, you just can't. And so for me, honesty is the best policy, and just try to just focus on just being a loving person and trying to focus on the now and not the outside kind of influences.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think over the summer, I basically supported, with some other parents, supported our kids who were 8 to 12-year-old Black kids to create some actions in the movement for Black lives, and they call themselves Black Kids for Black Lives. And we did some kid-centered actions because, white supremacy is, the fight to end white supremacy is going to take a while. We've made some really powerful strides recently, even as there have been some incredibly painful losses recently. But, I'm trying to raise a leader, and I'm trying to back that leadership, starting now. To me, it's really, we have an interlocking set of crises right now. There's the crisis of white supremacy, there's the COVID crisis, there's the climate crisis, there's the economic crisis, there's the electoral crisis, right? The crisis of democracy. And they're all, and also as parents right now, we're in this huge pandemic lockdown crisis of education and childcare, which is just nuts. Because, and it's, anyway, I could say so much there, but I'm gonna focus on, the thing to me that's really hopeful at a time where there's also a lot of danger is the fact that these solutions are also interlocking. So the fact that defunding police has become more mainstream and in the public debate than ever before is really powerful, right? Because the solution to police brutality is taking resources out of the police and putting them into Black communities, which is, of course, two of the demands of the movement for Black lives. So to really shift those priorities. And for me, also, the Green New Deal is really powerful because the Green New Deal looks at creating solutions to the climate crisis that are also solutions to the economic crisis. And unlike its predecessor, the New Deal, right, which had some racism and sexism embedded in it, the Green New Deal has the potential to really not leave anyone behind and to address a lot of racial inequality and gender inequality. And then we have the COVID crisis, which is very much connected because one of the things that leads diseases and that haven't been in the human population before is the destruction of habitat when suddenly animals that have not been in particular places are there now because their habitats have been destroyed. And the climate crisis right now is destroying all kinds of stuff. So I feel like when I look at these powerful solutions like the Green New Deal, like defunding police, I'm really hopeful. I'm not a pom-pom waving fan for the Democratic frontrunners, but my slogan these days is that Joe Biden can be my Uber driver. And Joe Biden can be, the Democratic Party, which is like Uber, is very flawed as a company, but you know what? They can dispatch the car that's going to get our movement, going to create a space for our movement to make the changes that need to change. So, you know, that's how I really see these crises.
How do you address that with your child?
I just talk openly with her about a lot of it, you know? And for me, when I talk about what's happening in the world, I always talk about it in the context of we are fighting, you know, this is happening and we are fighting this. You know, we're part of these movements. I take her to stuff. I try and make sure that it's kid friendly though, because kids can get traumatized in these movement spaces where adults are like, it's all terrible. You know, that's not always useful. But yeah, no, I'm very direct with her. I don't listen to the news in front of her. I try and give her a more curated version of what's up. But yeah, we talk about all of it.
So in terms of, like, just an example, at my workplace, we are doing a book club where we're pulling up Eyes on the Prize, and we're pulling up the Freedom Riders and SNCC and LCLC and the Black Panther Party. Are you bringing materials to kind of talk about history and how it affects today and that kind of thing? Is that because that's actually part of my art practice too? And so, you know, I know a lot of your work has documented, especially Amir documents Black life. So are those discussions that not only you're having with your child, but a discussion with yourself when it's reflected back in your work? How do you make that happen? Is that something that you do, or is that something that you are waiting for the school to do, or just can someone talk about that a little bit, like the history of how we got to where we are? Is that something at the age that your child is that something you can be candid about, or I don't know.
That's an interesting question, because I think there's a double edge to it. Because when I talk to my daughter, we have these conversations, and she's like, do Black people only struggle? Right? Because if you look at all the children's books, it's either their Underground Railroad, some quilts, or jazz. I mean, and that's it. Like this, when she's 12 now, so she's reading novels and the rest, right? And so we try to balance it, right? Like, here's history, but you're also a global citizen of the African diaspora, and here's how we get down across the world in a contemporaneous fashion, right? Okay. I think the history is important too, but I think sometimes the history can go into trauma porn. And I think that's a problem, because when Black kids only see themselves as having to resist or having to struggle without joy, as I think Brother Amir said earlier, without anything else, there's a problem with that. And I don't want my daughter to always think of herself from a place of deficit, you know? But on the flip side of that, I have her look at everything as a street fight. Your job is to get home. Whether you have your metaphorical hands up or your real hands up, your job is to come home safe. And so here are some tools for that to happen. Teach my daughter how to fight. She can use sticks, knives, headbutts, everything. She's a pretty competent fighter. But I also have her understand, here's what the law says. Here's how the law has been used against us. Here's how you can use culture as a weapon. I mean, because even though she is on the defensive as a young Black woman, I don't want her to feel that she's living from a deficit.
Yeah, for me and my family, we got a chance last year to go to South Africa, which was my first time going to the continent, and my son's first time. And just that's how I'm trying to teach, is through just experience. And so when we went out there, went to Soweto and went to the safari, it was just a beautiful experience. And to see it firsthand, to see that the misconceptions and the stereotypes that we built against Africa was largely not true, was like, that was just to see it up front. It made so much of a difference. So we constantly have the conversation. I try to put books into the house to make sure that the information is there, and just try to experience as much as we can. So before COVID, we've both been going to Europe, and to try to just to see that something is greater than the Bay Area, something is greater than Oakland, something, I had that chance as a young person to be experiencing something larger than that. And so as a parent, I want to make sure that my son has the same experience or better.
And that brings me to my next question. How does living in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, affect being a parent? How does living in the Bay Area affect your art? Okay, we can talk about the housing. We can talk about, the racial demographic, class, social constructs. But San Francisco Bay Area is a very unique, I think, as Shawn pointed out, a bubble. How does that impact parenting and your art practice?
A lot of gatekeepers in the Bay.
Wow.
A very, very incestuous art scene where certain people from certain demographics get to be the forefront and they gatekeep for the rest, whether it's an artistic nonprofit or the rest. And so I really look at the Bay Area as a cocoon. For me, this is my woodshed. This is where I create. I don't want to produce anything here just because of some of the weird artistic politics. And so I create here, but I look at the world as where I want my art to be. And I think, with that, and now that we've, COVID made us realize that you can work from anywhere. You can go to school from anywhere, despite some of the problems. This is no longer like, Brother Amir was talking about South Africa. We're looking to move to Cape Town in 2022 in May. So
nice.
That's just something that we're thinking about, because the world is as big or as small as you want it to be. And I think the Bay Area, since it is so, it's liberal on the outside. It has a liberal veneer. And so we get really comfortable here in certain ways. And I think that can be detrimental for creatives. And so I can't wait to immerse myself in some place in a completely different context where I'm not as comfortable, so I can do my best work in my twilight years.
You're not at your twilight years yet.
I'm Black. I live in dog years.
I was going to say, it's interesting. It's interesting, Shawn, what you were saying about gatekeepers here. I think, for me, in terms of publishing, there aren't enough gatekeepers here.
Wow.
And so as a parent in the early years, that industry is so heavily centered in New York City that I just felt like when my daughter was little and I couldn't go anywhere and I didn't have an agent yet and I didn't have a book deal yet, I felt like I might as well, be in some dusty one-horse town relative to the publishing industry. So that was one of the things that was hard early on. Once I had broken into the industry a little bit, it's been easier. And I will say, as a parent, COVID has provided just access to opportunities that I would never have had otherwise. Like, it's just too hard to travel. Before I became a parent, I was always on a plane. I was always traveling, doing spoken word, doing other fiction stuff, doing hip hop theater. I could move around. But as a parent, just, it's not that I can't go. It's not that I don't ever go, but the cost benefit analysis for me as a primary parent of okay, how's she going to get to school? Who's going to make the breakfast? Who's going to make the lunch? Who's going to do the pickup? It's not as easy. And now the idea that I can go into another room in the house and Zoom for an hour as opposed to getting on a plane or even getting in a car or on the BART, right, to go into San Francisco means that I can say yes more. And I think, everything Shawn was saying about distance everything, the world is different. And even as we come out from lockdown, we're going to be in a deep economic crisis. We may not have the kind of money that we've had in the past to fly people all around. So I think a lot of stuff will stay online, and that'll be interesting as a parent. And I also think that, the cultural context in the Bay Area has been challenging. I think especially for those of us who are have heritages that are sort of underrepresented in the Bay Area, those of us with Caribbean heritage in particular, it's interesting trying to find our place here or how to have those cultures reflected and represented here. But the other thing that I do think that's amazing, being in an area that does have a lot of progressive community, that it has been possible to find a lot of institutions to support my parenting, from hacker moms to different schools and organizations that I've been able to put my kid in that reflect my values. And I feel really blessed for that, because I know people in other parts of the country who really struggle to find a school that supports social justice, or really struggle to find camps or communities to send their kids to that aren't, kind of okie doke US race, gender, class politics.
I wouldn't be in any other place in the world. When you talk about civil rights, you talk about student rights, human rights, women's rights. The Bay Area has always been the forefront, one of the hot spots of where kind of revolutionary thinking has always kind of been around and kind of centered. So I wouldn't move as a photographer. I would not move from here. I thought about it on whether the Bay Area makes sense, and the weather is that tipping factor. I mean, besides the wildfires, the weather and just the people and really the history and the richness and the diversity. But, you know, every day, especially here in the Bay Area, we're constantly reminded that, and I like to refer to Malcolm X, a quote that he says, stop talking about the South. Everyone talks about the South. He says, anything south of the Canadian border is the South. And I think that in 2020, we realized that anything south of that Canadian border is all the South. And I think that, you know, we're in a very interesting time. And I mean, I couldn't be anywhere else, even with the housing crisis and everything that I wouldn't be anywhere else.
I feel the same way, although the economics are super challenging.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Amir, they want to know in the chat, in the questions, what your hat says.
Oh, they feeling it? All right. Let me zoom up on y'all so y'all can see it. Can y'all see that? All right. So
Made you look, Black Lives Matter. Awesome.
Yeah, don't get it twisted. It's not no my wife got on me with it. I was like, you know, we gotta rep because it's so important to vote and 44 days. So this is just getting the word out and making sure that people are being, you know, open. And so, yeah, made you look.
Nice. Tyler, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Not at all. I don't have much more to say other than economically it's really hard here, but my partner and I moved out here to be somewhere more progressive. Where we were living, there was lots of things where we were both challenged in many different ways. And but to reiterate what Shawn said, one thing that did took me a little while to figure out here was that a lot of people are really good at talking the talk without walking the walk. And so I learned to start reading through how people were really, really good with the language out here, but not necessarily living as progressively as the words that spewed out of their mouths. It's still though been so much better than where we both came from. And there's so much work that still has to be done here, and but I do feel like it's the most diverse place I've lived, where not in terms of populations being present, but people actually engaging with each other and collaborating with each other and creating community together. And I'm not saying that there isn't still bad stuff going down, and there still isn't, and there's obviously still all sorts of racism going on here, and sexism and queer hate and all that, but there's people trying here, and there's people experimenting here, but the economics make it harder. They just add a continuous pressure and stress through it all. So, but I do love it.
Well, that wraps up all the questions I have for you guys. Does anyone have a few things they want to say before we shut it all down?
Yeah, don't let parenting become a barrier. Let parenting be a battery. I think so many people choose not to follow what they want to do because, I can't because of parenting, because of this. It's like, no, don't let it be. Find a way to incorporate your art into your parenting and vice versa. I mean, my kid learned how to write early because this is what we're doing right now. Here's some crayons, here's some paper, let's rock with it. Now she's like, okay, daddy, I'm going to build a whole planet. I was like, all right, I'll see you tomorrow. And so, I mean, it's just like when you model the behavior, it becomes less challenging. But when you start looking at either parenting or art as an addendum to your life, as opposed to a part of your life, that's when all the conflicts come in. And I just think they're unnecessary because there's so many simpler ways to make sure that they're integrated into your life.
As a parent, I would say take this year as a sabbatical. That's for me. That's what I'm doing at home. We're doing some virtual field trips. We're doing just a lot of things that maybe I didn't have time to do during, when things were regular. But now that I'm working remotely, we have a little bit more time, like really just kind of focus on doing things out the box, especially in this virtual world with so much information being available. This is the time to really experiment and really focus on SEL learning.
Tyler, you were going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, definitely. You can be an artist and a parent, but you also have to allow yourself to let that be an artist in a different way than you were before having children, because it can't have the same shape, but that doesn't mean they can't coexist, because you are a whole person when you keep that part of yourself still alive and going, and your offspring need to see you being whole and alive. But it's also okay if, especially in those very early years, you're not able to do it to the same degree or in the same way as you did before. Being a parent is really exhausting those early years, and it takes a whole lot of your being, and that doesn't mean that being an artist is gone. It just means that things need to kind of grow into a new way of being, and that's your priority for a little while. So, because I hear a lot of people who, like, especially in those really early days, end up feeling like they start feeling hopeless and disconnected from their artist selves. And I just want to put out to them that it'll come back. Have that faith that it is part of you, and you'll find your way to it when you get and you'll work it out over time.
Yes. I think like compassion for oneself is just like one of the most critical things as a parent, because I feel like intimacy is a place where, where our messiness shows, right? And the relationship of parenting is so intimate and so constant, you can't kind of go backstage and do a costume change. It's just what it is.
Right.
And I think also just about parenting and activism, and the book that really helped me on this recently is a book called The Parent's Guide to Climate Revolution, 100 Ways to Build a Fossil-Free Future, Raise Empowered Kids, and Still Get a Good Night's Sleep. And, the thing that it really did for me that was so helpful was she really framed how, because there's been a lot of talk about social justice and change and activism on this panel, and she was saying that parents are natural activists. First of all, because we have such a stake in the future, right? We want a world that's going to be just and loving and fair and kind and here, right, for our kids. And so that's number one. But number two, also, parents are natural organizers, because we're always texting people for a play date and doing something at the school and, getting the carpool going. So that's one of the things that I've really taken from it, that just like Tyler was saying about how the art may not look exactly the same, especially not right away. The same thing with the activism, but we can fit it into the cracks. I know one of the things for me, as we move up into this presidential election, I've been like, oh God, I can't do the things I used to do. I was a get out the vote type of person, and I was going to maybe go to Florida. Well, none of that is happening, but it's like phone banking. My voicemail doesn't even work. Writing postcards, my handwriting is terrible. But, someone was like text banking. So it's like you can find your way, right? And that as parents, this is a time, for us to do even more unpaid labor, but to really think about how can we show up for this election.
And that's a great way to end this, is you'll find your way. And hopefully, you'll bring up the next generation. I want to thank you guys so much for being on the panel. I really want to thank the ASL interpreters from Pro Bono. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. And also want to thank Intersection for the Arts. San Francisco Zine Fest is a member of the Intersection of the Arts. Intersection for the Arts is a Bedrock Bay Area arts nonprofit that provides people working in arts and culture with fiscal sponsorship and resources to grow. Coming up next, we're going to have a Q&A with Donna Tucker. So folks, log on to YouTube, Facebook Live, and check that out. That's coming up in a few minutes. Again, thank you, Shawn. Thank you, Amir. Thank you, Aya and Tyler, you guys are awesome for taking the time out. Really appreciate you being on the panel and opening yourself up and sharing with us. But yeah, stay tuned for our next programming. Cyberfest is brand new and we're figuring it out as we go. So thank you so much.